Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to KETA for inviting me. I have spoken at KETA events in the past in Washington, and I've had the privilege of doing so. The last time I spoke at a KETA event in Korea was in 2001, when I came with optimistic news about the Doha round and the prospects of reforming trade remedies and the anti-dumping agreement and things like that. A lot has happened in the last 17 years. I would say that the past 2 years have been particularly interesting for the wrong reasons, but trade policy has been exceptionally topical. We have a president who is a major departure from 85 years of U.S. trade policy history, from the past 13 administrations. Presidents going back to Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s through Barack Obama saw trade as a win-win proposition, saw trade as mutually beneficial undertaking. They supported the institutions that underpin trade. They dabbled in protectionism a little bit every once in a while, but it was the exception and not the rule. President Trump is very different. He sees trade as a zero-sum game. There's winners and there are losers. He sees protection as a means to make America great again. And I think that's problematic. I would say, I go back 85 years to Franklin Roosevelt, and I was thinking about 1934, we had something called the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, where Congress delegated some of its authority to the president to go out, to have the capacity to go out and negotiate trade agreements and bring them back to Congress for an up or down vote. It was basically dealing just with tariffs at the time. But under the U.S. Constitution, it's Congress that has the authority to deal with trade. But over the course of the 20th century, Congress began delegating its authorities, some of its authorities, to the president. There was laws like the anti-dumping law and the countervailing duty law and the safeguard law. And eventually things like giving the president the power to raise tariffs if we face a national security threat. Things like that. Those were statutes through which Congress transferred some of its authority to the president. So this is what we're at right now. Just very briefly, the president has, I think, abused some of these laws. The first one, anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws, everybody in this room probably knows what that's about. A lot of Korean businesses have been caught in the crosshairs of U.S. overuse, I think, of anti-dumping. I think Korea is the third largest target. But I would say anti-dumping and countervailing duties does not speak to the Trump administration's policy per se. I mean, these orders, 462 of them that have been in place, predate the Trump administration. And those laws are on what I call statutory autopilot. Basically, domestic industries, if they feel certain conditions exist, they're injured, and they think they can attribute that injury to less than fair value trade or subsidized imports, they bring cases. So the president really doesn't get so involved there. Likewise, Section 201 of the Trade Act of 1974, the safeguards. You all are familiar with the large residential washers case in particular, solar panel components. A new case has been brought on bicycles. Again, these are not that controversial. They've been used in the past. The U.S. law seems to be out of sync with our obligations at the WTO. In the past, when the U.S. has brought Section 201 safeguards, it's been found to be in violation of our obligations at the WTO. In these cases, I don't think the industry's needed relief, but the president, these were the first really noteworthy batches of protectionism he engaged in at the beginning of this year. But where it really gets problematic is with the next two. So Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, that is supposed to be a national security provision that gives the president the authority to identify a national security threat and then come up with a plan to mitigate that threat. And what Congress did when it delegated that authority to the president, it didn't really imagine a president like Trump. All right, it imagined a president who was acting, in a responsible way that was going to impose national security-related tariffs in response to a real national security threat. But it turns out the president has broad discretion here, and he's virtually unchecked with respect to this law, and that's what he's used to impose the steel and aluminum tariffs, which I think has given him a lot of leverage over trading partners to demand certain changes, and we've seen that. Finally, Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, it's a law that's been on the books for a long time, well, since 1974. It's the law that the United States is going after China with on forced technology transfer, IP, and the like. When the United States joined the WTO, when it was created, we essentially we gave up our capacity to use this law because it makes a particular country judge, jury, and executioner. But the president has decided to go this route, partially in response to this narrative that has taken hold in the United States that the World Trade Organization doesn't work. It's not the right way to go with respect to China, and that we have to act unilaterally. So let me talk a little bit about the congressional elections and whether or not that will do anything to rein in these issues here. First of all, in your packet you have my presentation, which I submitted to KETA last week. Since then, the election results have been changing and they've been rolling in a little bit, so I've updated a couple of the slides. So what you see up here supersedes what you have in your package. Bottom line is the Democrats have taken control of the House, and Republicans retain control of the Senate. As of the last count that I was able to do before I got on a plane to come here, in the House, I just want to make sure that the laser is this one in here? Yeah. Okay. In the House, Democrats have picked up 34 seats. Republicans have lost 36. There were 7 vacancies here, and we're still waiting on 9 House races and 3 Senate races that are undecided. The Senate has is going to the Republicans. They're likely going to pick up a couple of seats. What does that mean for the committees? So the committees are going to change hands. The House Ways and Means Committee is going to go to the Democrats. Sander Levin is retiring. You all know Sander Levin. He's been there for a long time. He's not been particularly great on trade, I think. He's been an advocate for the U.S. auto industry. But he's likely to be replaced by Bill Pascrell from New Jersey, he has a fairly typical Democratic profile, meaning that he tends not to support trade liberalization and tends to support protectionism. The current chairman, Dave Reichert, has retired. There's not much. I mean, the committee will have the opportunity to throw some of its weight around, but I don't know how significant that's going to be. On the Senate Finance Committee side, the Republicans maintain control. Orrin Hatch, who's been the chairman for a while, is resigning. He's likely to be replaced by Charles Grassley. And the ranking member, Casey's returning. So you shouldn't expect much change from Senate Finance. House Ways and Means, maybe they will be able to present some counterbalance to Trump, but I'm not sure how much. I'll get to that shortly. These are the issues that Americans thought about when they went to the polls. At least this is what the exit polls were saying. Trade is still not one of the major issues on people's minds in the United States. Healthcare was big, immigration was big. I think that was partly because the president was planting the seed that we have a big problem on the southern border. The economy that came in third, and I guess trade is part of that. I didn't see a number that broke trade out by itself. But people who had comments on trade, 25% thought that Trump's tariffs helped, 31% thought it hurt, and 36% said it had no effect. And it's hard to tell whether or not it did have an effect. Some members, some senators who were opposed to Trump's tariffs lost, notably Claire McCaskill, senator from Missouri, Heidi Heitkamp, senator from North Carolina, they lost. But pro-tariff candidates won in many districts where the tariffs were hurting business. So it's hard to tell whether or not the people are, uprising about this. In your packet, this says steel and aluminum tariff request. This is actually aluminum tariff exclusion request. So with the Section 232 tariffs, companies could seek exclusion requests. And if we look at those exclusion requests as take them as an approximation for pain from the tariffs, these are the most, in descending order, the most aluminum exclusion requests. So that was Illinois, 5th District of Illinois, had 665, but it went Democrat 78 to 22. It turns out that half of these districts went Democrat and half of them went Republican. So it's hard to discern really anything dramatic from these numbers. But this is kind of interesting. The steel and aluminum tariff exclusion requests combined. So as of a few days ago, 29 districts had flipped, congressional districts. And by flipped, that means switched from Republican to Democrat. In this case, flipped from Republican to Democrat. And among those districts, among those accounting for the highest, Illinois 6, 2,660 exclusion requests. Texas 7th, 1,922 exclusion requests. Michigan's 11th, 1,308. Those are, they all flipped, and those are 3 of the top 5 in terms of exclusion requests. So as a proxy for trade pain and a desire to see change, you see a little bit of it in those numbers. However, there are plenty of districts that had exclusion requests where you didn't see anything really flipping. So 301 districts of the 435 had at least one exclusion request. The average number of exclusion requests was 81.5 per district. So 81.5 per district. And then the average exclusion request in flip districts was 235.4. So it's suggesting that maybe it has something to do with the election results, that trade was weighing on people's minds. And by the way, this is just looking at flipped districts. It does not take into consideration districts that were extremely Republican in 2016 and are a lot less Republican now. So that's not captured here. There's still more analysis to do. This is just as an approximation looking at production of soy in the United States. The darkest green is where soy is produced the most. Our soy farmers have been hit pretty hard. They've lost most of the market in China. And then this is what the election map looks like. If you remember, the districts are it's this area that's soy. What you see is Iowa, pretty solidly Republican district. The 1st and 3rd district of Iowa flipped to Democrat. And I think we've seen a couple of more flip too in the updated data since I was able to put this presentation together. But what we need to see is more dissatisfaction in this region here if we're going to attribute this to trade. So this is my takeaway, that really the fact that the House is Democratic doesn't do a whole lot in terms of Trump's prosecution of the trade war with China. One of the reasons is that there is bipartisan support for that trade war. I think for the past 10 years, the attitude toward China in the United States Congress has been drifting toward the more security-oriented, hawkish end of the spectrum for the past decade or so, since the Great Recession. And there is bipartisan support for getting tough with China. Imposing tariffs, threatening to impose tariffs, protectionism is generally the viewpoint, the perspective of the Democrats. It hasn't really been a Republican Party position over the past couple of decades. So I don't see them, the Democrats, posing much of a challenge to Trump in terms of reining that in. 232, where the president has all this latitude to compel governments to do things that he wants, and 301, if Congress wanted to pass a law to sort of restrain what the president's actions can be, it would need 2/3 of both chambers, the House and the Senate, to override the veto that the president would likely strike. The president would likely veto this. So the Republicans didn't try to do anything. There was legislation introduced by senators and congressmen who were retiring, who didn't have to worry about facing a primary challenge. It's unclear that the Democrats will do anything in this realm right now either. Now, where there could be an impact is with respect to the broader trade agenda. The U.S. MCA, the NAFTA 2.0, has been presented to Congress. If Congress wants to, if the House wants to put up a stink, it can try to reject the agreement, can vote against it, can rally the support against it. The Speaker of the House can actually take the legislation off of the fast track, the Trade Promotion Authority legislation that gives the President the authority to bring back deals for an up or down vote. Nancy Pelosi is likely to be the Speaker of the House again. In 2007, when she became Speaker, she took the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement off of the fast track, citing some technicalities that the Bush administration had failed to meet. So she could possibly do that. The question is, do the Democrats want to be blamed for fomenting the ongoing uncertainty? President Trump could threaten, if you're not going to vote on the NAFTA 2.0, then I'm going to withdraw from the original NAFTA. And I think a lot of Democrats most people don't want to see that happen. So I don't think that there's a lot of scope for Congress to do much to rein in the president. I mean, to discipline him. They could perhaps ask that the NAFTA be reopened, to insist in, organized labor is not very fond of this agreement. They're not fond of any agreements, really. But it's possible that they could force him to reopen it and take it off the fast track and vote for it as just a standing legislation without fast track. But that would then require the Canadians and the Mexicans to come back and change everything. That's unlikely to happen, in my opinion. I have Chorus 2.0 in here because the administration, just like the NAFTA, sees Chorus 2 and the NAFTA as signs of their successful trade policy. So if the Democrats want to stick a finger in the eye of the administration to deny him this success, they might stand up and try to do something. But the president, the administration sees Chorus as not something that needs to be submitted to Congress. They see it as a revision of the original Chorus because there are no laws that need to be changed in the United States. We'll see whether that's the case. One of the provisions in the new Chorus is the extension of the truck tariffs another 20 years to 2041. To me, that might require some sort of congressional consent or congressional action. So if the Democrats want to get involved, they could possibly muck that up. But I tend to doubt that they will at this point. It creates uncertainty for the U.S.-Japan, U.S.-UK, U.S.-EU trade agreements that are in the pipeline. And I think, other implications for Korea. I think we talk about Korea needs to think about diversifying. Of course, as Chairman Kim mentioned a short time ago, Korea's interdependence with China and the United States, it's in the crosshairs. Korea needs to diversify, needs to look south. It needs to perhaps look to the WTO and come up with ideas for how the WTO can be reformed in ways that will make the United States come back in and play by the rules. So, unfortunately, I don't have a very optimistic message that this is going to change Trump's trade war. What likely will is if, in fact, those changes in Congress suggest that people are getting antsy and that they're getting really concerned about it and that they're petitioning their members, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, to make the case to Trump that he's killing the economy. Trump's getting away with a lot of this because the U.S. is supercharged with a lot of fiscal and monetary stimulus, and the economy's doing quite well. But that's not going to last very long, so we'll see what happens there. So why don't I stop there? I think I was supposed to go for 20 minutes. I may have gone over a little bit. I'm sorry to steal from my successor's time, and look forward to your questions later this afternoon. Thank you very much.